If you agree that true heroes often walk among us unnoticed, quietly carrying stories the world has forgotten, then like and subscribe, because this one deserves to be told. She wasn't a soldier anymore, not in the way the world measured it. To the customers who passed her by in the aisles, she was just another store clerk in a red polo shirt, tidying shelves and lining bottles of detergent so the rows looked neat and full. That's all they thought she was. Nothing special, nothing important, just another face behind fluorescent lights and barcode scanners. But what they didn't know, what none of them could possibly imagine, was that every time her hands straightened those bottles, her mind still heard the crack of distant gunfire. Every time she crouched to lift a heavy box, her body moved with the memory of carrying far heavier loads under skies split with smoke. And every time she rose back to her feet, calm and quiet, her bones carried the weight of a story no one here would ever ask to hear. Emma Hale was 28 years old, too young, people thought, to already look tired in the eyes, too young to already prefer silence over chatter. But silence was where she lived best. At first glance, you wouldn't notice her. She kept her hair tied back in a plain bun, face bare of makeup, her uniform shirt tucked in with almost military precision, though her coworkers just thought she was uptight. Her sneakers were scuffed but always tied neatly, her name tag polished, though no one ever read it. To them, she was background, the girl who clocked in on time, stacked boxes, and clocked out without much else said. A ghost moving through a world of grocery carts and conveyor belts. They joked that she worked like she was in the army, but always with a smirk, never knowing how close their words had cut. Emma never corrected them. She never told them that she had been in uniform, that she had spent years in places they couldn't spell, that she had stood shoulder to shoulder with men and women twice her size and kept pace without complaint. She never told them how she'd seen fear claw at the strongest and how she'd held the line anyway. No, she left all that behind. Or at least she told herself she had. Now she stocked shelves, answered questions about coupons, and nodded when her manager barked orders, as if that was all her life had ever been. To anyone else, it was ordinary. To Emma, it was penance. Customers barely glanced at her. A mother rushing past with 2 kids in tow didn't notice how Emma instinctively stepped aside, giving the family room to pass, her eyes already scanning the exit the way she always had. An elderly man asking where to find sugar didn't hear how carefully she spoke, each word chosen with the calm of someone trained to defuse tension. The teenagers who laughed when she dropped a pack of paper towels never saw the flicker of restraint in her jaw, the discipline that kept her from snapping back. They just saw an employee, someone invisible. Her coworkers weren't much different. They called her military girl behind her back, though none of them actually knew her story. They teased her for walking too straight, for saluting customers half-jokingly when she carried out their groceries, for standing still in staff meetings as if waiting for orders. They didn't understand that old habits don't die. They just sleep inside you, waiting. Sometimes, when the store was quiet and the air conditioning hummed low, Emma would drift back in memory. The clatter of boots on gravel, the coded phrases that carried life or death, the faces of civilians she once shielded with her own body. But then a customer would cough, or a cart would squeak past, and she'd force herself back into the present. Just Emma, the grocery clerk. Nothing more. And yet, there was always a tension around her, an aura that people felt even if they couldn't name it. The younger clerks whispered that she was kind of intense. The assistant manager rolled his eyes whenever she corrected a misplaced fire extinguisher or tightened a loose bolt on the stockroom door. She wasn't paid to care that much, he told her once. She only smiled faintly, knowing better. When you've lived the life she had, you don't stop noticing threats. You don't stop guarding. You only stop explaining. It had been 2 years since she left the service. 2 years since she stepped off that plane, duffel bag slung across her shoulder, eyes burning not from dust anymore, but from questions no one would ask. She hadn't gone home to parades. She hadn't gone home to speeches or crowds or medals pinned to her chest. She went home to silence. To a small apartment with peeling paint, to a grocery job that kept the rent paid, to aisles of Tide bottles stacked in rows that she lined up so neatly it almost looked like order in a world that had none. She told herself it was better this way. Better to be unseen than to be remembered. Better to live in quiet aisles than to hear the ringing of names that would never answer back. Her unit was gone, dispersed, scattered across states and jobs and shadows. The war didn't end for them. It just fractured, leaving pieces behind in each of their lives. For Emma, the piece was silence. She wore it like armor. But sometimes silence broke. Sometimes in the still hours of the morning, when she unlocked the store at 6 a.m. and the sun barely brushed the parking lot, she would hear echoes. The clank of metal gates reminded her of armored doors. The hiss of soda machines sounded like the hum of comms. The way customers argued over coupons, it was almost like the frantic scramble of civilians on evacuation day. She hated that her mind made those connections. But it did. Every time. And so, aisle by aisle, day after day, she pushed them down. Pushed the memories into neat rows. Sealed them behind her quiet face. Told herself she was just a grocery clerk now. And maybe, if she did it long enough, she could believe it. But fate has a way of breaking through even the thickest silence. And Emma's silence was about to end, not with a whisper, but with a command. Because one ordinary afternoon, as she slid a bottle of Tide into perfect alignment on the shelf, she would hear a voice that shattered everything. A trooper calling out words no one else understood. Words that belonged to another life. Words that would remind her who she really was. And when those words came, the grocery aisle would never be the same. The day it happened began like any other, which is exactly why no one saw it coming. The grocery store was alive with its usual rhythm. The squeak of carts, the distant beeping of scanners, the hum of tired parents herding restless children down cluttered aisles. Emma Hale was on aisle 7, crouched low to the floor, sliding heavy boxes of detergent onto the bottom shelf. Her hands worked steadily, without hurry, without pause. She always moved like that, precise, measured, each gesture purposeful even in something as mundane as aligning bottles of Tide. To the others, it looked obsessive. To Emma, it was just order. A small piece of discipline in a world that too easily fell into chaos. Above her, fluorescent lights buzzed softly. A few aisles over, someone laughed too loud. A cashier called for a price check. The world spun as it always did, uncaring, unremarkable. And then, 3 words sliced through the air like a knife. Tide lantern, passenger list ready. The voice wasn't casual. It wasn't some mother muttering about laundry. It was sharp, commanding, deliberate, spoken in the exact cadence of a field order. Every sound in the store seemed to pause around it. The mother who had been scolding her child went silent. The 2 teenagers near the candy aisle stopped mid-laugh. Even the intercom, humming with soft pop music, suddenly felt too loud. Emma froze. Her hand hovered over the bottle she was about to set down, her knuckles whitening as the past surged forward with brutal clarity. Tide lantern. No one here should have known those words. No one in this quiet little town should have ever said them aloud. And yet, the sound of them crashed into her chest like a blast wave. Her breathing slowed. Her heart didn't. She felt the shift immediately. The prickling heat that raced down her arms, the way her ears sharpened, tuned to the sound of boots approaching on the polished tile. Because she knew that walk. She had heard it before. Not hurried, not casual, purposeful. And then he appeared. A uniformed state trooper, broad-shouldered, his hat tilted just so, his boots clicking like gunmetal against the floor. His eyes swept the aisle once, scanning as though he were clearing a room. And then those eyes locked on her. "Sergeant Emma Hale," he said, his voice steady, public enough for every bystander to hear. "Your unit still remembers. We need you now." The detergent slipped from her hand, clattering softly against the shelf, rolling into the neat row she had built. For a long moment, Emma didn't move. She couldn't. Her throat tightened, her breath shallow, her body caught between 2 worlds, the fluorescent aisle in front of her, and the scorched horizon that lived forever in her memory. Customers looked between the trooper and the clerk crouched on the floor, their faces twisted with confusion. The woman in the red polo shirt? The girl who scanned their coupons and bagged their groceries? He had to be mistaken, but the trooper wasn't smiling. He wasn't mistaken. He had spoken the code exactly, and the code wasn't for them. Emma forced herself to stand. Slowly, steadily, she rose until she was eye level with him, her face blank, unreadable. Her coworkers had seen her quiet before, but never like this. This was different. This was silence sharpened into steel. "What did you say?" she asked, though she already knew. The trooper's jaw tightened. "Operation Tide Lantern. Passenger list ready. Confirm." Her stomach lurched. She remembered that phrase. She remembered the evacuation, the civilians huddled in the back of a transport truck, the coded call that told them it was time to move. The words weren't random. They were tethered to a night when seconds had meant survival. A night when she had been 25 years old, a field sergeant, and every decision she made had carried lives with it. Emma's eyes darted around the aisle. Customers were whispering now, some pulling out phones to record, others backing away as if they were intruding on something far too heavy for them to understand. Her manager stood at the end of the aisle, mouth open, unsure whether to intervene or to stay silent. No one moved closer. No one dared. The trooper took a single step forward, his voice lowering but still firm. "It's not a drill. We've tracked you for months, but now the call comes through. The passenger list isn't just history anymore. It's active. Names are on it. Lives are waiting. We need your eyes. We need your judgment." Emma's chest tightened. Her past had never been buried. She had only sealed it in silence. And now, someone had come to break that seal wide open. She wanted to speak, to tell him he was wrong, that she wasn't Sergeant Hale anymore, that she was just Emma, the grocery clerk, the woman who stocked shelves and counted hours until payday. But the truth burned too hot in her throat. She couldn't deny what she knew, that the words he spoke weren't nonsense. They were real. They were hers. Behind her, a young coworker whispered, "Wait, did he just call her sergeant?" Another muttered, "What's Tide Lantern? Is this some kind of prank?" The whispers spread, rising like a current until the entire store seemed to buzz with disbelief. The trooper ignored them. He extended his hand, palm open, not as a stranger, but as a soldier would to a comrade. "Sergeant, the world forgot your story. But your story isn't over. Are you coming?" Emma didn't move. Her mind flashed with images, faces of those she'd saved, faces of those she hadn't. The passenger list, the nights of fire and silence. The way her commanding officer had said once, "These codes will live longer than you, Hale. One day, you'll hear them again. And when you do, you'll know." And now, here she was, in aisle 7, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, detergent bottles lined in perfect rows, staring at a man who had just ripped open everything she thought she had buried. She looked down at her hands, still trembling slightly, still smelling faintly of cardboard and soap. Civilian hands. But underneath, she knew the truth. They were still soldiers' hands. Emma swallowed hard, lifted her eyes, and finally spoke. "Then show me the list." The trooper nodded once, sharply, like a salute. The store remained hushed, 100 eyes watching, 100 breaths caught in their throats. Because in that moment, everyone realized this wasn't just a grocery clerk. This was something else entirely. And the story of Emma Hale, the silent veteran in aisle 7, had only just begun. The store never felt so silent. For a moment, it seemed even the humming refrigerators along the back wall had stopped, as if the entire building held its breath. Emma Hale stood rigid in aisle 7, the trooper's words echoing through her chest. Passenger list ready. She had agreed to see it, though she wasn't sure what that meant anymore. The trooper slipped a small, battered folder from under his arm. It wasn't thick, just a few creased pages inside. But the sight of it made Emma's stomach twist. He held it out to her with the same care a man might give to an heirloom. The folder wasn't just paper. It was memory. It was proof. Emma's fingers hesitated before she took it. When she finally did, the weight felt far heavier than the thin cardboard suggested. Her hands trembled as she flipped it open. Names stared back at her, printed in neat, deliberate lines. She knew those names. Civilians, translators, medics, children. The passenger list wasn't a code now. It was a record. It was the tally of lives she had once ferried through fire and chaos onto a transport under the banner of Operation Tide Lantern. Her chest tightened. She remembered shouting orders into the dark, remembered the way the truck shook as mortars landed nearby, remembered the fear in their eyes as they waited for her word to move. She had carried that memory for years in silence, telling no one. And now, here it was, written plain in front of her in a grocery store aisle. The trooper's voice broke softly into her thoughts. "These are the people who lived because of you." Some still talk about that night. Some sent letters to the Pentagon every year asking if you were ever found. They never knew your name was Emma Hale, but they remembered the one who led them. Lantern. The nickname cut through her like a spark. Lantern. That was what the evacuees had whispered that night. pressing close to her in the shadows. Follow the lantern, they had said, because she carried the only light through the storm. And in that instant, surrounded by bottles of detergent and shelves of paper towels, the memory wasn't just hers anymore. It was alive again. Customers who had gathered at the edge of the aisle leaned in, their faces etched with confusion, curiosity, and a dawning awe. Her manager, who had always dismissed her as too serious, stood frozen, his jaw slack. The teenagers who had snickered at her earlier now stared wide-eyed. Even the mother with the restless children pulled them closer, whispering something they couldn't quite understand but knew was important. Emma closed the folder slowly, pressing her hand against its cover as though steadying herself. She looked at the trooper, her voice low but unshaken. "Why now?" He met her gaze evenly. "Because the world has a way of forgetting people like you. But not everyone forgot. Today, the names you carried came to light again, and they asked us to find the lantern." Her breath caught. "They remembered?" "They remembered," he said firmly. "And they wanted you to know that they lived. That their children lived. That their grandchildren live now because of you." Emma blinked hard, the sting in her eyes breaking past the walls she had built so carefully. For years, she had convinced herself her silence meant it didn't matter anymore. That her sacrifice, her scars, her discipline had been swallowed whole by time. But here it was, undeniable, the proof that silence had still carried light. The trooper stepped back then, boots striking the tile with precision. He raised his hand in a crisp salute, sharp and flawless, the kind she hadn't seen directed at her since the day she left the service. And this time, he held it. Emma's throat closed. She hadn't expected that. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she returned it, her hand rising steady despite the tremor in her chest. The entire aisle watched as a simple store clerk returned a salute that carried with it years of honor no one had ever seen. Whispers spread through the crowd. She was military. They called her sergeant. What does lantern mean? But none of them mattered anymore. The sight spoke louder than any explanation could. The trooper dropped his salute at last, his voice firm. "You didn't just stock shelves, Sergeant. You carried lives. And today, we wanted you to know, we see you." Emma lowered her hand, her expression unreadable, though the weight of his words pressed visibly on her shoulders. She let the silence stretch, let the truth settle over everyone watching. Then she spoke, calm and quiet, her voice carrying farther than she expected. "I wasn't a hero. I was doing my job. And I'd do it again. But remember this." She glanced at the customers, the coworkers, the faces staring at her as though seeing her for the first time. "The ones you overlook are the ones who may have carried more than you'll ever know. Treat them with respect, even when you don't understand." The grocery store was still. Not one person spoke, not one person laughed, not one person shifted. The words landed too heavily for that. Emma handed the folder back to the trooper, her eyes steady. He accepted it with a nod, but before he turned, he said 5 words that sealed the moment into every heart present. "The lantern still burns bright." He left then, boots echoing against the tile until the sound faded into the distance. Emma stood in aisle 7, the silence wrapping around her like armor, like memory, like truth finally seen. Customers drifted back to their carts slowly, but their faces were changed. The teenagers didn't snicker. The mother whispered to her children, pointing gently toward Emma. The manager avoided her eyes, shame painted across his face. And Emma simply bent down, lifted the bottle of Tide that had rolled loose, and set it back in its row, perfectly straight, perfectly aligned. Because that's what she did. Order in the chaos. Light in the dark. Lantern. And from that day on, no one in that store ever looked at Emma Hale the same way again.